Okay, so my name is Sarah. I am the area manager for the Trussell Trust for Bristol, Somerset and Gloucestershire. If you've just joined us, it would be great for you to put your name and your organisation into the chat so that we have a good idea of who we've got here today. The session is going to be about an hour. It will be no more than an hour. And as we go along, please do feel free to pop any questions into the chat. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to tell you a little bit about a cash first approach to tackling food insecurity. Then Abby from the Independent Food Aid Network is going to talk you through a little bit about how to use the Worrying About Money leaflets. And then we'll hear a bit from Elizabeth at Citizens Advice about the work that they are doing. And then finally, there'll be an opportunity to have a chat with each other in breakout rooms. Please do ensure that you're muted so that we don't have any background noise. So this is the Gloucestershire Worrying About Money leaflet that we'd encourage you to explore and to use as frontline services. The original leaflet was put together based on learning from Scotland's A Menu for Change project, and IFAN, the Independent Food Aid Network, has since been supporting the co-development of similar leaflets in many local authorities across Scotland and England. In Gloucestershire, it was developed by the services mentioned on the front of the leaflet with lead input from IFAN, the Trussell Trust, Feeding Gloucestershire and the district councils. And there is a separate leaflet printed for each district of the county, and a special thanks needs to go to the district councils for funding the leaflet. The leaflet uses a simple three-step process to help somebody to access the support and the advice that they need to maximise their income as much as possible. And it really represents a cash-first approach to food insecurity. We've been working really hard to distribute the leaflets across the districts, and we will explain later how you can order more leaflets if you wish. But a key outcome from today is that we want you to discover the leaflet and know how to use it with confidence. So as a starting point for our time together today, I'd love for you to use the Menti tool to help us to get a feel for where you are at the start of our session. So if you can go to menti.com, either on your laptop or your mobile phone, and enter the code that is on the screen, it will let you answer the questions shown here. If the tech side is too much for you, if you're in the car or just don't want to use it, then that's fine, don't worry at all. Have a think in your head about the three questions that I will read you in a second, and score yourself between 1 and 5, 1 being no knowledge at all and 5 being lots of knowledge. So the first question is, I understand what a cash first approach to food insecurity is. The second question is, I know what money advice and support options are available locally. And the third question is, I feel confident about asking people about money worries and guiding them to support. So I'm just going to give you a sec to get your head round Menti and to fill in your answers. And if not, you can pop your responses down on a piece of paper so you have an idea about where you are at the start. I'm going to ask you to keep that screen up as we will return to these questions at the end. I'll just give you 10 seconds or so to work around Menti. I'm not going to share these results, don't worry, but I can see them coming in. Okay, so as I said, I work for the Trussell Trust and I support food banks across Bristol, Somerset and Gloucestershire. And I support those food banks in 2 ways. So firstly, I support them with their day-to-day operations and governance to enable them to distribute emergency food as well as they can for as long as they are needed. But I also work alongside them strategically to think through how they can work towards ending the need for their services locally, or at least not be needed at the scale that they are currently. And the co-production of these leaflets really follows this strategic approach and what we call a cash-first approach to food insecurity. When an individual can't afford the food that their household needs, it's easy sometimes to focus on the provision of food as the solution. But at the Trussell Trust, we try to avoid talking about food poverty, energy poverty, period poverty, etc., which merely kind of sections out the symptoms. And instead, we try to focus on finding solutions to the bigger picture, which is mainly how we as a society can ensure that everyone has enough money to afford the essentials. And a cash-first approach aims to, wherever possible, focus on those income-based solutions, which ultimately ensures choice and dignity for people when they do face financial crisis. As I've mentioned, we're working very closely with the Independent Food Aid Network, who have really been pioneering these leaflets, as Abby will talk about later. But I thought what I'd do now is share an infographic that IFAN have put together. Please be aware that there's no sound. Don't expect any sound on this infographic. So interestingly, as we go through the leaflet, you might notice that food banks and other emergency food aid provision aren't included. And that's not because they aren't out there and providing support. In fact, they've just had their busiest few months ever. But we wanted to shine a spotlight on the types of underlying money worries that people might be facing and generate conversations around how these issues might be resolved and how people can get the appropriate support in the longer term. Oh, I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So these are just some of the statistics from us at the Trussell Trust from the 12 months to April 2023. And the headline is that we have distributed almost 3 million food parcels in the last 12 months, the most ever given out by the Trussell Trust network, and representing a 37% increase on the year before across the UK. Depressingly, we have now hit the 1 million mark of those parcels being distributed to children. And as part of these figures, there are more than 750,000 people that have not needed to use a food bank before. If we drill down to Gloucestershire, almost 46,000 parcels were given to people in the districts of Gloucestershire in the last financial year, so 22 to 23. And in the financial year before that, it was 29,000. So 29,000 to 46,000 in a year, and which represents a massive increase. I will send a link around with the slides later to the data set by area if you want to drill down to your specific district or you want to see more about the data for the and the detail for the area that you cover. But these are unwelcome record statistics, and it only really represents a section of the emergency food provision in Gloucestershire. So it's only really the tip of the iceberg. And IFAN data also shows relentless increases in demand, which has an impact on the volunteer teams who are working so hard to keep up with that demand. I think that alongside this stats picture, it's really important not to lose sight of the individual people amongst the stats. So we know that many of us are facing money worries and impossible decisions. And you will know in your frontline context the impact that this has in terms of the people that are coming to you for support. This all can be quite depressing, quite heavy, but we know that there are some really positive things happening, and we always look out for positive solutions and positive actions. But we do know that the increase that all charitable food organisations are seeing isn't just due to COVID-19 or the cost of living crisis, but that actually that increase in parcel numbers over at least the last 5 years are due to low levels of income and a social security system which isn't fit for purpose. So just to give you a feel for some of the work that both the Independent Food Aid Network and Trussell Trust are doing at a national level, we've all been really involved in an all-party parliamentary group on ending the need for food banks. And the findings coming out of that are really pointing towards these cash-first responses. I also just wanted to mention our latest campaign. So the Trussell Trust and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, along with many other partners, have also recently launched a campaign calling for the government to guarantee our essentials. I'm not going to go into it in detail here, but I will send a link out to further information with the recording later on if you wish. And I always think it's helpful to bring it back to something that we can do. And this leaflet is a great way that you as an individual can make a difference. So I'm now going to hand over to Abby to talk you through the leaflet layout.
Thanks, Sarah. So as Sarah said, my name's Abby and I'm a project officer for the Independent Food Aid Network, and I primarily work on the Cash First referral leaflet project in England. And as Sarah said, advice is something that's fundamental to a cash first approach, and the leaflet is based on connecting people to this local advice and support through income maximisation and helping people to access their existing financial entitlements. And through this, we can help reduce the need for charitable food aid. I think we're on the next slide, please. Great. So again, as Sarah said, this leaflet is based on the Learning from Scotland's A Menu for Change project. It has 3 steps and is designed both for people in financial crisis, but also frontline workers and volunteers looking to support them. Leaflets of this kind have been co-produced in 110 different local authority areas, as well as the 5 areas we have represented here today. So the project is growing at quite a fast rate in the UK. These leaflets, as again Sarah said, have been co-produced with Feeding Gloucestershire, the Trussell Trust, and all of the kind of corresponding district councils. So as you can see, step 1 asks what the problem is. So that's, I suddenly have no money, I'm waiting on a benefit payment decision, my money doesn't stretch far enough, and I have debt, and there are kind of little sub problems within those. They then link to some of the options of which the dots are represented there. So step 2 kind of shows some of those options for those problems. So option 1 may be council support schemes. So that could be housing benefit, discretionary housing payment, or council tax support. Option 2 is maximise your income. So this can be ensuring someone has a benefit check, seeing if someone's missing out on anything they're entitled to, such as school clothing grants or free school meals. Option 3 is debt advice, which speaks for itself. Option 4 is a benefit advance. So this will be if you've made a new claim for universal credit and you're in financial hardship before you receive the first payment. Option 5 is a hardship payment, which you may be entitled to if you've been sanctioned. And option 6 is challenge a decision. So you can do this if a benefit has been reduced or stopped and the person you're helping or yourselves think this is unfair. These options then link to step 3, which details some organisations that can help with these options. So as you can see there, North and West Gloucestershire Citizens Advice helps with all 6. Caring for Communities and People helps with options 1 and 2. So the leaflet walks people using it through to these local organisations that can help with some of the problems that are associated with money worries. We also have a other support section for more holistic forms of advice and support. So this it could be organisations that help with domestic violence. As you can see here, they've got community wellbeing services on them, and they also include some of the national organisations on there where you may not get direct support from these, but they're still some of the information on their websites is still useful to have anyway. Then that's the leaflet in a nutshell, really. The idea is that it's really easy to use and takes people right to the organisation that can help them the most. It's also important to make the leaflet as accessible as possible. So every leaflet is linked to an interactive version that works in the same way as the leaflet. You click on the problem that kind of represents your problem the most, and that takes you through to the organisations that can best help with that problem. There's also poster versions that can be made if people think this is necessary. We also offer a translation service. Again, people think this is necessary. This is something we can discuss, and we also offer easy read versions. And we usually work with numerous stakeholders in partnership when putting these leaflets together, as I said, to make sure the information is accurate and that the leaflet is disseminated as widely as possible. In other areas, leaflets have got to GPs, libraries, fire and rescue services, schools. I know some councils have distributed them alongside people's council tax bills. So any ideas that people have for getting leaflets as widely into their community as possible, I know will be greatly appreciated by all of us. As I stated, the leaflet is a tool for people in financial crisis, but ideally we'd want to be reaching people before they get to this point. So all too often, this point of crisis results in people needing to use a food bank, and this is something that we want to avoid. Therefore, it's vital that we engage with referral agents to local food aid organisations for this work to be impactful. The leaflet can help to interrupt those default referral pathways and help people access support to maximise their income, ideally so they don't need to access food aid. As I said a couple of times, it'd be great to hear from attendees here for any ideas on how we can get these leaflets into the community as much as possible. I'll hand back to Sarah for now, and if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them in the chat or when we've got dedicated question and answer session.
Brilliant. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. Thank you, Abby. That was really good. If anyone has any questions, please do feel free to pop them into the chat. We're going to have a bit of a section later for answering questions. And yeah, we're also going to have a chance to discuss any ideas that you might have for getting the leaflet out a bit wider. We're going to go into breakout rooms in a little bit. But first, we are going to hear from Elizabeth Hall from Citizens Advice, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the work that she's been doing. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Elizabeth. I'm Chief Officer at Citizens Advice in the Stroud and Cotswolds district, but obviously you've got North and West Gloucestershire that covers the other 4 districts. We work in really similar ways, and in fact we often run shared projects together. So you know, it's whatever you hear from me is probably pretty much translatable to them as well. At Citizens Advice, we offer a really holistic service to clients. So it means that when a client first makes contact with us, we do a full exploration of the issue they're presenting with, but also sometimes the other related or other unrelated issues that they've got. So a good example is often a client might come and say, I've lost my job, I've been dismissed, I want employment advice. I think it was unfair dismissal. But we know that if you've lost your job, it often results in a loss of income. They might need to access benefits. Sometimes that's for the first time. Sometimes, especially in rural districts, their accommodation can be at risk if it's tied to their job. They might have debts as well that they've been sort of paying successfully, or they've had credit card bills that they're managing, but all of a sudden we know that in a couple of weeks' time they're not going to be able to make that payment. The cash first approach is just really important because food bank support, charitable support, fuel vouchers, they're just a sticking plaster. They're a temporary solution to crisis, and they don't address the cause of the problem. And if we don't address the cause, clients just become trapped. It is that sticking plaster. They become disillusioned and really, feel, desperately, sort of affected by it. And actually, we see advisors who say, "Oh, this is just awful. We're not sorting it out. This is just a sticking plaster." So, when they do come, when it is food bank support or a food voucher or fuel voucher, that is a crisis point. And the vast majority of clients who come to us for that crisis support are just incredibly distressed that they cannot feed themselves or their family. Accessing a food bank is the last resort. They feel embarrassed, they're ashamed, they feel like it's no choice. The food voucher, they do their best at the food banks, but it's not massive amount of choice. So it's that sort of taking away dignity. And we see a real impact on health and well-being, especially mental health issues for clients who are in this form of crisis. So we want to reach clients before the money worries become a money crisis, because, at the start of the crisis, where we can, limit the amount of time to sort the issues out. Obviously for us, some clients come to us as a result of the leaflet, but we do have dedicated food bank advisors in each food bank in the district. So we see it sort of both sides, as it were. We've definitely started taking the leaflets out to events that we do, because what we're finding is that people often pick them up and they might say, oh, this isn't, it's not for me, it could well be, but I've got a friend, or actually I think my son is struggling, I'm going to pick one up for him. And so it's really clear, it's accessible. It doesn't say, are you in crisis? It says, are you worrying about money? Quite frankly, most of us are. So I think that the language used is really sort of accessible, and it means that people feel able to pick it up to say, oh, this looks interesting, and hopefully take some of the action. We've been giving them out with household support fund vouchers as well, because it does give other options, not just us. So somebody might think, Citizens Advice, I don't think that's for me. I want something, I'm more interested in what the Chan can offer, or I'd be more interested in something that can support me in the evening, if there's, a solution there. So that's been really useful for us as well. What I've done in previous sessions is we've talked about client story, which I am going to do again, because I know that people find client stories really useful. But yesterday we had a client who came into our Stroud. I walked into their waiting room and there was a client. And quite frankly, the client's had a few food bank vouchers in the past and haven't seen her for a while. She does wave at me if I see her in the post office, but she's had food vouchers from us. She's had household support fund. And to be honest, I thought, oh, here, crikey, she's back, and so I said, oh, so-and-so's back, is everything all right? And somebody said, oh, her PIP award came through and she wanted to know how she opens a new bank account so that she can budget with it. Which I just thought was, when it can be so demoralizing, depressing and distressing, it was just, I thought I'd share that little bit of positivity, that it really uplifted us all, that she's, out of that cycle of crisis and actually thinking about budgeting, and is she going to get some interest on a bank account? So I'm now going to tell you about James, who was one of our clients who actually did need food bank support. So James had worked with his employer for almost 20 years, and he had an existing long-term health condition that flared up, and it meant he was off work for a long period. He had a partner and children, and he actually owned his own home with a mortgage. James's statutory and contractual sick pay was coming to an end, and he still wasn't well enough to return to work. His universal credit, his personal independence payment, didn't provide enough income to pay the mortgage, and which is obviously increasing, and meet his regular living expenses, as well as including food. We also discovered that James was on prepayment meters, and he said he couldn't top his meters up either. So he had food vouchers and fuel vouchers, but using that cash first approach, and in line with the sort of numbering on the worrying about money leaflet in step 2, the food bank advisor did the following. So number 1, she made sure that James had got council tax support. We see so many people who think that their council tax support is paid with universal credit, and they end up in debt because they've just not realised that their council tax isn't being paid. So that's a really good one to start with, checking that clients, have you got council tax support, and making they have not just got the 25% discount, but they have got the council tax support. Our advisor then did a benefit check, and she could see that there'd been a mistake with his claim. So they hadn't applied the child element. So she got that backdated, and that increased their income by £3,500 a year. She also then said, hang on a minute, you should have the carer element in universal credit, which was, so they put a claim in for that, and that results in an increase of income of £2,000 a year. She could see that he could apply to the Severn Trent Trust Fund, because he could get help with the cost of his water bills. Energy, we used to do a lot of switching. We were, pretty smooth, pretty hot at switching, but there's just very little that we can do with switching energy. But we could give him energy sort of efficiency advice and some hints as to how they can, maintain the warmth in the home sort of without costing too much money. When the advisor on number 3 asked about debt, it turned out that he'd got this one priority debt in the form of energy debt, which is why he was on the prepayment meter. But what it meant is every time he fed that prepayment meter, they were deducting an amount for arrears. Our food bank advisors and all our advisors can do what we call a debt assessment, and they can then consult the debt team. We have an FCA accredited, we're FCA accredited, so we can provide, you know, a really wide range of debt solutions for people. So it also means that, you know, they've got access to specialist debt advice to say, what should we do? And actually, we worked out that if we wrote off his debts from the household support fund for his energy debt, it would mean that all of the money then could go. It wasn't a huge amount of debt, but it meant all of that energy money that he's putting in on those vouchers actually gives him energy in the house, not going off to pay, and that they could be in a better position to go forward. On number 4 on the leaflet, where it's talking about benefits advance, he was already in receipt, so there was nothing there that, you know, we could do on number 4. Again, number 5 with a hardship fund wasn't relevant, but we could give the client household support fund. As I say, he had some money for energy, and he also had some money for wider essentials, for warm bedding, which meant that he and the children could stay warm at night, and they didn't have to worry about putting the heating on at night. We've also been fortunate that we've had access to household support supermarket vouchers, which just means that if somebody does need a food voucher, they can have the household support food, you know, fund voucher, which means they can buy meat or fruit, vegetables. We've found that, you know, in line with our sort of thinking on sort of how dignified or the dignity that people have, they've loved household support fund vouchers rather than a food voucher, because they've been able to go to Aldi and choose what they want and buy what they want and need for their family. So we've really noticed that that's been really popular, those household support fund vouchers. Lastly, on that challenging benefits decision, we could see with James that he was in receipt of enhanced rate mobility, but he was only getting this standard rate daily living because he was 1 point under the threshold for that for enhanced rate. He'd challenged it, but he'd been unsuccessful. It was, you know, a long time. So our specialist benefits team picked it up and said, yep, let's go for an appeal. We've currently in the position of having 100% success rate on our appeals, and his appeal was successful, which gives him an extra income, again, of £1,600 a year. So, and getting back pay. So that cash first approach has led to a benefits increase alone of over £7,000 a year. Help with his water bills, help with household support, just means that he's actually able to make ends meet, and he's not needed to access food bank or charitable support since we put those measures in place, that cash first approach in place. So yeah, from our point of view, it really works, and it's really helpful to be so systematic as well, and it does give that, you know, really useful framework if you're supporting clients to think, actually, where do you fit and what can be done.
That's so helpful. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's great to hear about your work. Does anyone have any questions for Elizabeth? Joe, I can see a hand up. Joe Main.
Hi, Elizabeth. Just a very quick one. Can you just go over again what your food bank advisors do? So they will assess the debt, will they?
Yeah, so I mean, all of our advisors, whether they're, you know, the volunteers who answer who are on the telephone, or the food bank advisors, they do. It's a debt assessment. It's embedded in our case recording management system from Citizens Advice, you know, nationally. So it takes the advisor step by step, and then at the end of it says, yes, this is it doesn't sort of identify the solution at that point, but it identifies, could they do it themselves with a budgeting plan? Should we keep them in-house? Should we signpost them to somewhere else? Depending on, you know, whether it's priority, non-priority. So it's a step-by-step tool that they use, in addition to obviously the training that they've had. But yeah, it's a debt assessment. It's a really good idea, because it's you know, it can be quite complicated debt to deal with, can't it? And to know the sanctions. So it's about saying, you've got this debt, and, you know, if you don't pay it, these are the potential sanctions. And we see people all the time who perhaps, you know, are in debt, but they're making the wrong choice about who to pay back because they don't know.
Yeah.
You know, so they're running the risk of bailiffs because they're paying the mum back. So, you know, it just identifies those issues, Jo.
Great, thank you very much.
Other questions? I can't see you all, so if you do have a question, please put up your virtual hand or just come off mute and ask if you wish. Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth. I believe you have to shoot off.
Yes, I have to shoot off now. If anybody's got any questions that they've forgotten, I'm sure, you know, Sarah or Lizzie will pass them on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so
you.
much.
Thanks. Bye.
Awesome. Bye. Okay, we now have a bit of a section and an opportunity if you have any questions on anything else that we've covered so far. So on the leaflets specifically, or anything around the cash first approach. Does anyone have any questions? Please either put them in the chat or put up your virtual hand if you want to ask a question.